Okay, we're gonna get started here in just a few minutes as soon as my clerk comes in, and this is gonna be a full committee work session, so hang on for just a couple of minutes, please.
Good morning, everyone. Time to start. Welcome to the Tuesday, March 4th meeting of Science, Technology, and Energy. We will begin today, as usual, by all rising and joining Representative Mattson as she leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we're here for a work session this morning on 5 bills that we will be holding an executive session on after lunch. So we're going to start with HR 15 because we have that amendment in hand. And while the committee discusses that amendment, I will track down the amendments for 3 other bills so that we can discuss those as well. So let's start by talking about amendment number 0679H to HR 15, and I will ask Representative McGee to discuss this amendment with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I had the dubious honor of making a comment that perhaps we should have a few whereases at the front of the bill to help let our congressional folks understand the motivation for us asking them to intercede with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And so I was tasked with coming up with what those whereases would contain. So starting on line 3, it says, whereas it is Federal Energy Regulatory Commission practice to accept new and upgraded transmission costs via a presumption of prudence without a detailed revenue of individual project costs. And whereas consumer utility costs are increasingly burdensome and warrant detailed scrutiny of large-scale utility systems investments to protect consumers. And then it goes on to the language that was in the bill to begin with. The other 2 things we did was we made the edit in the sections of the bill that had the word justified and cut them back to say just and reasonable, which was the language that was intended. And that's it.
Very good. Representative, anyone have any comments moving forward on this amendment? Representative Harrington.
Yeah, first I want to thank Representative McGee for doing this. It's definitely an improvement over what I had out there, so I appreciate your work, and I think it's very good. But I guess the only I had done a amendment to, which I'm going to try to cancel now, if I can figure out, I can know how to send them in, but how to cancel, that's a different story with OLS. But anyways, the only thing I would see in this that may be a minor issue is at the beginning of it in sentence 3, where you say, whereas it is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission practice, and then you wait until you do put it in another spot where you abbreviate the FERC. I didn't see it in the other spot. Okay, so forget that. It's okay. You just didn't do it in the first one. You did it on line 13. Okay. You put it in, so that's as long as it's people understand that FERC is the FERC. So this looks fine.
Any other comments? Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, yes, thank you. I've just never seen it before, so could somebody explain to me why the New Hampshire State Librarian is included in the distribution list at the bottom?
Yes, that's essentially for archival purposes. Virtually everything that goes through the legislature ends up in the state library or the state archives, one or the other.
But doesn't it end up there automatically? I mean, why? Don't they archive all legal documents?
I suspect that they do, but this is added to the legislation just as an assurance that it happens.
Okay. I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I just have never seen it before.
Pretty standard boilerplate for this kind of resolution. Further comments? Everybody happy with HR 15? Okay. Let us move on. I will now pass out an amendment for HB 221, and we will discuss that. HB 221 is,
Pulling the other one closed.
this is a work session. Relative to assessment of cost effectiveness of the system benefits charge. So. Do you guys have enough that way? Yep, okay. All right, does everybody have a copy of the amendment? Okay. So the amendment replaces the bill, and the first part of the amendment, starting on line 8, going all the way down to line 25, is identical to the original bill. The amendment adds a new section starting on line 26 that runs through line 15 on page 2. And then the amendment also adds the text on line 16 and 17 on page 2. And the reason for this amendment, starting on page 1 at line 26, is that most of this text is now obsolete. And so it has been struck from the amendment. And then at the very end of the paragraph on page 3, after the strikeout, on lines 14 and 15, the word ratepayer is replaced with the word customer in that sentence. So it reads it used to read ratepayer savings, now it reads customer savings. And so that's what the amendment does. And I'm open to questions and comments on the amendment. Representative Wendy Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm intrigued about replacing ratepayer with customer. What do you see as the difference between those two?
Okay, that was a suggestion made by the Public Utilities Commission. There was a typo corrected to it in that sentence also on line 14 where the word assure has been replaced by the word insure.
Did they give you any, I can't remember, I can look through my notes. Did they give you any justification for changing it from ratepayer to customer?
I don't recall from their text, I don't have it right in front of me, what their reason for replacing ratepayer with customer was, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes. Representative Ploget.
Yes. Could it have to do with first page, line 23, where customer classes is referenced?
Could very well, yes. That's a good suggestion. So, Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I kind of like to take us back to the purpose of the bill. It appears that the major intent of the bill is to allow the Public Utilities Commission to have latitude to move away from using the Granite State test and the identified testing metrics that we kind of painstakingly put in place as a state. And to give them latitude basically to come to maybe different results than what the Granite State test and the current mode of reviewing the New Hampshire Saves triennial plans was designed to do. So I'm wondering whether we should be discussing at all whether those changes are actually needed. Because
Okay.
the cost effectiveness piece is what led us to designing the Granite State test as a state. So who is saying that it isn't adequate?
Representative Harrington filed this bill.
Okay.
Representative?
Sure. I worked with the PUC on this. They felt as though that there's nothing specifically wrong with the Granite State test, but it's getting old. It was developed some time ago, and we shouldn't hold people to something that old, and instead allowing them to come up with a different method if it seemed to be a better method. And as it says, additional tests developed through an adjudicative process and approve them by order prior to commencement of any triennial audit period beginning with the program year 2027. So that if there was going to be a change, this would have to be an adjudicated process in front of the PUC where everybody would get to come in and put their 2 cents worth in as to why you should make the change, why you shouldn't make the change, why you should make this additional change, and then that would be adjudicated. It's just a matter of allowing flexibility to improve the process.
And who would make the decision if the adjudicated process is in the control of the Public Utilities Commission? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it's of, by, and for the PUC. But I guess there was never really, in the hearings, I didn't hear an adequate argument that many of us are old, right? We're not obsolete. We get better with age. So it doesn't mean, just because something's been around for a while, it doesn't mean it requires renovation. What I didn't hear was what they were trying to solve for in terms of identifying cost effectiveness, right? That's the goal, is to make sure that the plans that are presented are cost effective. But there's no delineation of what cost effective is. Is it 3 times return, 4 times return, 10 times return? Who decides that? If you pass this bill, what you do is you put it back in the hands of the Public Utilities Commission, who all of us had to override when they found a triennial plan that didn't work brought in front of them, that everyone else that was involved in development of that plan agreed was good for the state of New Hampshire. So I'm just trying to figure out whether we're making things worse by passing this bill that was requested by the Public Utilities Commission, so that the Public Utilities Commission has more ability to upend future plans.
So one of the reasons for this amendment and this bill in general is that when we did pass HB 541 back in 2000, I think it was 2022, when we did pass that bill, there was an extensive amendment that went with it that put into statute the procedure that we wanted the Public Utilities Commission to follow in order to deal with energy efficiency and the system benefits charge going forward. And that fairly large and complex administrative amendment change, I should say, included language that restricted the Public Utilities Commission to only looking at and evaluating changes to the program from one triennium to the next, rather than being able to evaluate the entire 3-year triennium plan. So this amendment is designed to address that oversight that was put into statute, I believe, unintentionally back in 2022. I know I worked on that amendment And I was unaware that that restriction had been added to the legislation, and it was not something that I would have approved at the time had I realized it.
Mr.
So this-
Chairman,
this,
is that related to the 97% versus 3% that they've brought up?
Yes,
Is that what you're talking about?
yes.
Okay, and I think that's a feature, not a bug, and that's why I'm bringing it up here, because I think that 549 actually did what you and others, what we intended, which was to further define the contours of the program so that there wouldn't be an attempt to overspend in terms of taking advantage of the ratepayers. So it put contours around it and said, this is how it will go forward, this is how it will grow. So it was very deliberate. And the whole idea was to maintain stability in that program for all of the stakeholders that are involved, including small weatherization businesses. I mean, we were both there for that. So I guess what I'm asking is the Granite State test still supports what was originally envisioned for a review by the Public Utilities Commission. And it almost seems as though the Public Utilities Commission is trying to figure out some way to have a way to say that changes to the program are unwarranted. It almost, it doesn't seem like it's based on finding something that's wrong with the Granite State test that needs to be fixed. We didn't get any specifics on that. We just got, please give us the ability to do something else if we feel that that's appropriate. And they didn't really give us anything compelling about what they thought they would need to do. So I'm inclined not to support it because I don't think they ever said what was wrong with the Granite State test. The Granite State test, they testified here, didn't take certain costs into account, but it also didn't take certain benefits into account. And it was specifically designed that way to be an adequate test that would give them a cost-benefit evaluation that was reasonable. And so what we didn't get was, what are you pointing to that needs to be fixed? And what are you pointing to that you think would be better in terms of getting us to a place where we can assign reasonable? Or do you just want to be able to say what's reasonable and what isn't? And I think it's too arbitrary. I think they should do more work if they want us to change the law.
So the nub of the issue here is that if we're going to spend 70 to $80 million of ratepayer money on a yearly basis to implement energy efficiency programs, how do we know that we're getting the best value for that every dollar of that 70 to $80 million expense? And the Public Utilities Commission has told us that based on the way the legislation is written today, they have no ability to determine if all those millions of dollars are being spent in the best manner possible so that ratepayers can get a maximum return for their investment. These changes are designed to allow the Public Utilities Commission to do a full and thorough analysis and oversight of these programs every 3 years, which I think is what we intended when we created the legislation back in 2022.
Thank you. I have one more thing I'd say on that, just if you
Go ahead.
that when I first started paying attention to the triennial plans, it was the utilities that were providing us with a report on the return on investment, specifically related to the return on investment for a specific prior 3-year plan. And so the information is available, whether people believe it or like it. That it was not a question of us not having anything to assess. And so it's not a black box. The program was extremely well run. It was award winning. It still is, I guess. I don't know. But I know that I certainly have still at home 3-year reports from Eversource and the other utilities who used to contribute via the Easy Board. We have reports because they were required statutorily to provide those reports that let us know the cost benefit analysis. The last one I reviewed was $3.8 for every dollar spent. So it was a 3+ return on investment. And again, I don't know what the state thinks is sufficient, but once you spend money to save energy on a building, then you're lowering demand, which lowers the cost of the system for everyone, which is the reason that we're doing demand side investment. So I still don't understand how this bill advances anything except allows more of a fishing expedition, right? So there's 97% that isn't up for review. You're just looking at changes. And the PUC is saying, no, we want to throw all of it up in the air. And we have to figure out, do we want them to throw it up in the air? Because I don't think that that's a good use of anyone's time. There's never been a question that the utilities were running the New Hampshire Saves program well. And every constituent that I've ever talked to in my community, Republican and Democrat, has said they really like that program and don't want to see it hurt.
Well, we all know that we have great utilities in this state, well-run utilities that serve us well. But the perennial question that the Public Utilities Commission is forced to ask is, do we just trust the utilities? Do we just let them do what they want because they assure us that what they're doing meets their own cost-benefit test? Or should we take a look at what they're doing and try to make a judgment about whether they in fact are doing the best that they can for the ratepayer and the dollars that are being invested on his or her behalf? So I think that's what we're saying here. If we're going to look at utility rates on a regular basis with a skeptical eye or a critical eye, shouldn't we look at everything utilities do with a skeptical or critical eye? And that's what this bill and this amendment seeks to do with regard to the energy efficiency programs. Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share my ranking member's concern, if not objection, to basically to the premise of this bill. I wasn't, of course, part of, what went on back in 2022, but I've heard plenty about it, heard it discussed. But I was, this very subject matter was about the first 10 years of my professional experience in the energy efficiency field. Energy efficiency measures, cost effectiveness, all that stuff. I worked for the nonprofit Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships that was contracted on behalf of all the utilities in New England to design consistent programs, design programs so that all of that program design, planning and coordinate could be done efficiently across states, so that every utility in every state didn't have to invent their own programs and implement their own programs and do all the science and analysis behind it. Anyway, all of that stuff is pretty well established. Energy efficiency programs run by utilities across the country have been in place for 30 years. And so, energy conservation measures and payback analysis, it's kind of a science and expertise, and it doesn't change, year to year, every 3 years. But the testimony that we heard yesterday in this room from the consumer advocate about, anyway, the testimony from Don Kreese yesterday that concerned partly the dynamic between the PUC and our own Department of Energy, the PUC refusing to stay in its lane as no longer the policy making executive branch entity. And the lack of deference that the PUC has showed to parties who bring a settlement agreement to the PUC for approval, which of course was the whole controversy 3 years ago with the energy efficiency programs. They were brought, by the utilities, by the consumer advocate, by the interveners. Another set of, here's the next 3-year set of energy efficiency programs. And the PUC suddenly decided it knew more and just blew it up, and what we heard yesterday should be ringing in our ears when we're thinking about this, because I see this bill as the Public Utilities Commission trying to, again, get out of its lane, insert itself, and say, oh, well, we suddenly have we with our, whatever we are, remaining 13 or 15 staff, suddenly have all kinds of expertise where we're going to dig into the analysis that has long undergirded these programs. And as Representative McGee cited, they've been shown to have a 3.8, 3.7 to $1 return for every dollar spent in the programs. That is, ratepayers, customers who take advantage of the programs experience $3.8 in energy savings over certain durations, and to the economy. But what the lifetime of the measures is so there's like, if you don't, it's really arcane stuff, but every energy conservation measure has a duration. Over what time period should the savings be counted? And I see that basically what's afoot here is people differing on policy who want to get into it in the name of we have more expertise, and suddenly we're going to decide that those savings don't last so long. We're going to make a policy decision to not count that as savings. And we're gonna change this up, and it's not necessary, and it's not valid. There's a lot of experience, history, and proven cost effectiveness that are in these energy efficiency programs that our utilities run, and that utilities across New England, across the country run. And it's not necessary to every 3 years give our PUC the ability to start tinkering in there. And again, going to the stability of these programs that customers, not just residential, businesses, industries, count on being available, and that the businesses who are part of that little part of our economy, insulation, weatherization providers, which we were talking about yesterday, weatherization, those are small businesses and medium-sized businesses that are involved in the supply of energy efficiency services and measures. And you can't just have this, make it into law that, well, every 3 years we might pull the rug out from under this because we've decided suddenly among our little staff that, we know better. So I don't like this bill at all.
Yeah, I kind of got that impression. Yeah. Although I will say I am kind of astounded that you feel that a program as huge as this one doesn't require any oversight. That kind of baffles me.
That is not what I'm saying.
JD
I'm saying that
Bernardi
there
has a
is
comment.
plenty of oversight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I look at the language in this bill, and it still says the Granite State test is the primary test, with the addition of the total resource test as a secondary. It also says that the PUC may consider some modifications in the adjudicative process. It doesn't say they're going to throw the whole thing out and we're going to start with a new bathtub and a new bathwater.
But it says they may.
I don't believe that is the intent, nor is that going to be the process that will be followed.
Please wait till you're recognized to speak.
So I do not find this a unacceptable bill. I think it's a good opportunity to allow the commission to use new analysis as it may be appropriate.
Representative Harrington.
Yeah, a couple of quick things. One thing that was said earlier, which I totally don't agree with because I don't think it's correct, is that every megawatt we save saves money for everybody. If you look at the demand curve, it's basically pretty flat. Only during peak times you can cut a substantial number of megawatts from demand, and it has no effect at lowering rates because that curve is very, very flat until it gets to the peak times when then every megawatt really makes a difference. The second thing I wanted to make, and this concept somehow that because a small business is getting subsidies through ratepayers to install whatever they're installing, weather stripping, insulation, whatever, that somehow that gives them a permanent right to collect that money forever, just isn't correct. They're getting money because of a government edict. The government obviously has the ability to take that away at any time. They don't grant them any right when they get that. And third, they're talking about the PUC as if they have nothing to do with this. This is part of setting rates. The PUC is the one who sets the rates. They determine what the utility is going to get for a rate, and the effectiveness of these programs is part of that rate. So obviously they're the person who should be involved in doing it. And again, there's nothing in here that says they have to change anything. It simply gives them the flexibility to open an adjudicative proceeding and to look at something that, in this case, is going to be 5, 6, 7 years old and see if things have changed. Maybe the way we're producing energy in 2028 or 2030 might be different, such that these energy efficiency methods need to change. I don't know, but I don't want to lock the hands of the PUC to even consider that. And again, this is part of rates because the ratepayers are paying for the energy efficiency cost. So setting that, how those work, is part of setting rates, and that's the purview of the PUC.
Representative Corman has a comment.
Thank you. Chairman Vose asked Commissioner Chattopadhyay, I guess, I have trouble saying it, asked him that the Granite State test doesn't capture all the costs, the total resource test doesn't capture all the benefits. Together, do they capture all the costs and benefits? And the answer was no. And the commissioner said that the bill would be a step in the right direction. Then I asked, all right, if we need a new test, who creates the test? And the commissioner's answer was that it would be part of a PUC docket. So one possible way to go here would be to have the PUC open a docket and look for a new test, but that the legislature would have to approve this new test, just like the legislature approved the Granite State test. Give the PUC the flexibility. If you really want to try to come up with a new test, go for it, but you don't get to actually use it until we approve it.
Interesting idea. Further comments on this amendment? Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a possible solution, what Representative Corman just mentioned. I just fear that we went through a similar docket not too long ago. And at the end of the day, who's going to pay for that docket? You know, that's just money. All this is about is money, and we're going to be spending money to develop a new test. You know, and as we heard here just recently, I mean, the Granite State test is an adequate test. It considers some of the costs and some of the benefits. It doesn't provide a total picture. So opening up that can of worms again, that's a debate that can go on forever, you know? So, I mean, we have an adequate test as it is. And do we want to just go down that road again? I'm not sure that it's money worth spending.
Okay, any further comment? Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to draw attention to the fact that we have a couple of people in the audience who are actually responsible for these, the New Hampshire Saves program for their organizations, and people who were formerly on the Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Energy Board, the EASY Board. These are the folks that go in front of the Public Utilities Commission with those plans and justify them and help put together reports. Basically, they're required to justify the plans. So it's not like the PUC doesn't already have oversight and information from people who have subject matter expertise. That's what they are. That's their job. Their job is energy efficiency programs in the state of New Hampshire, and making sure that the Public Utilities Commission has what it needs in order to okay those plans. So it's when a lot of times when we talk about bills where people don't have any firsthand knowledge, everyone just gets in their head how they think this thing occurs. There isn't actually that I'm aware of, a problem here that is in need of solving in terms of the stakeholders, but it sounds like the Public Utilities Commission is looking for some kind of definition that, as Representative Kaplan said, the debate could go on a very long time as to what is the correct thing to be looking at. It took a really long time to get everyone to agree that the Granite State test was an adequate test. So why are we circling? I would not be in favor of this bill because what it does is it gives an open-ended process to a group of, appointed folks who do not have subject matter expertise in this particular thing. I mean, I know that the most vocal person on the Public Utilities Commission, I listened to his appointment in front of the Executive Council. He had no energy experience at all when he was hired to that job. And that can happen. You can be appointed for other things that you're good at. And finance is one of the things he was good at. But to be acquiescing as a legislature to a bill that is vague from someone who does not have subject matter expertise, who is telling us, give me the ability to question the people who do know what they're doing, because I don't know if they know what they're doing. I think we're creating a problem if we put this bill forward. And I am verbose. I am a chatty Cathy, but I don't normally proselytize like this. And this is a small bill, really, but I really don't think it's a good bill. And I hope that you'll consider the fact that what it does is it opens a door to give the Public Utilities Commission the ability to say yes or no to anything that comes before them, and to open an adjudicative proceeding where they are the end all of the decision. And it hasn't provided us with any more information about what we're enabling. So it just isn't a good bill from that standpoint. And I like Tom's idea. That's a good idea.
Okay, we have two other bills we need to discuss. Representative Swanson.
Thank you. So in summary of the things that I've heard, do we get close enough to good enough with the changes with a change suggested by Representative Corman? Yeah, I mean, is that in the realm of feasibility?
I guess that would be a discussion that individual caucuses would have, but that's not what's on the table at the moment. All right, let's talk about a couple of other bills here. So the next bill we want to discuss is House Bill 672 FN. That's a bill that is designed to allow for off-grid electricity providers in New Hampshire. And I have a relatively small amendment here that basically just cleans up a couple of ambiguities in the original legislation. So let's pass that out. And then I'll go over the changes. While that's happening, I'll remind everybody that this is enabling legislation. And all it does is define what an off-grid electricity provider is. And in a moment, we'll discover what it is not. And also defines that, or states that such an off-grid electricity provider would essentially be unregulated, not subject to regulation. But there will be a few minor exceptions to that. So does everyone have a copy of the amendment at this point? Okay. So here are the changes on line 9. After the word boundaries, there is a new sentence added. Off-grid electricity providers are not public utilities. That would probably seem obvious, but it was suggested to me that stating that explicitly in the legislation is a good idea. The next change is down on line 14, where it says, shall be exempt from. Previously, that said from this title, and it was suggested that we might want to spell out what this title is. So it now says RSA Title 34, which is the title in our RSAs that encompasses all energy regulation. The next change is on line 15. After the word regulations, I added a comma and the phrase such as municipal and state highway safety regulations and another comma. That was to indicate that while these facilities would be basically unregulated by energy law, they're not exempt from other laws that apply, particularly health and safety laws. And then the final change is on line 20. And once again, it just changes the previous text that read provisions of this title to read provisions of RSA Title 34. So those are the changes to that the amendment makes, and I'd appreciate any comments. Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think appreciate the changes. I think they're good changes. My just a question dealing with the last one that you mentioned. It seems to me that, I mean, because you called out specifically municipal and state highway safety regulations, and you do say they shall remain subject to all other applicable laws and regulations. So I guess things like fire codes, electrical codes, all that, I guess would fall under that. It seems enormously significant. If a town had, you know, this giant electricity generator and battery, and that towns would be very concerned. So I guess it's in there, all other applicable laws and regulations. Maybe it's codes, to mention codes. Maybe it's assumed. Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Representative Harrington.
Yeah, I just had a question because I'm looking back at my notes from this, and on line 9, when it says does not cross state boundaries, I'm not even sure what that means. Does it mean state boundaries like the boundary between New Hampshire and Vermont? Or is it the boundary between property that's not owned by the state and property that is owned by the state? So that to me is not really clear. And I have a note here about no crossing government land or roads, and I'm trying to think back if any particular regulations kick in if you are putting a transmission line across a government-owned road or highway. I think that automatically kicks into some additional regulations. It may even get the site evaluation committee involved. And I just wonder if we have to address that in this bill.
The amendment actually addresses that. First off, the original bill and the amendment specifically mentions RSA 162H, which is the site evaluation or the citing bill, or the citing statute. And the phrase that I added, such as municipal and state highway safety regulations, would cover the issue that you just raised about a transmission line crossing a highway, either a municipal or state highway. They would have to abide by any regulations regarding that crossing. And with regard to cross-state boundaries, I think that that's fairly standard terminology to indicate the demarcation between one state and another state. So yes, we're talking about the state line between New Hampshire and Vermont. Further discussion, Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just went in to look at 34, RSA 34, in terms of what we're exempting these generators from. And I don't understand, honestly, I don't understand how it would work. I understand it's intended to be enabling legislation, but it's saying that these folks can transmit and distribute and sell electricity at retail prices to consumers if they're not connected. But all of the rules that are under RSA 34, public utilities, they're not considered public utilities, but these are basically all the rules in terms of what happens if there's a violation, if there are false entries, if there's negligence. So we're exempting folks that they can just go do whatever they want to do, and there isn't anybody who has oversight for them. And it says other rules apply, but why wouldn't these rules apply? Even though they were designed originally for utilities, that's because only utilities were running gas operations and electric distribution. Why would we exempt folks from all of these? There's no reporting, there's no oversight, there's no way to corral somebody, even if they're doing something that would be dangerous or illegal.
So this is a bill designed to unleash innovation. And it was originally called Customer Regulated Energy. And the reason it was called Customer Regulated is because essentially there would have to be a contract between the provider of the electricity and the buyer of the electricity. So the contract would be I'm drawing a blank on the right word here, but the contract would be the thing that controls or that governs the
Agreement.
relationship between the buyer and the seller. And it would have within it all of the legal requirements that one party would want to impose on the other, and vice versa. Obviously, a contract is a negotiated document. So that's the kind of regulation that would happen here. It would be strictly regulated by the buyer and the seller, as long as it didn't interfere with municipal and state highway safety regulations as stated in the bill, and as long as it conformed to the precepts of our siting statute. So there is no other regulation required here. And the reason the bill exists is to establish that no other regulation is required to govern this relationship between a buyer and a seller. Representative Wendy Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my notes from the hearing, I have, I took note of off-grid pricing, and specifically that Texas rates were raised during severe weather events. And I also wrote that this creates a situation where customers are held hostage. I have great concerns about setting up these independent energy generators.
Well, once again, that would be covered by the contract between the two. I know somebody that I spoke with about this bill raised the situation of, well, what happens when the off-grid electricity provider has to shut down for maintenance, or maybe even they have an unexpected shutdown, like an equipment malfunction or something. What happens then? Well, it's up to the contract between the generator and the buyer to specify in that contract what happens in that situation. It's not up to regulation to specify what happens there. It's up to the relationship between the buyer and the seller.
But who oversees these contracts? I mean, I assume they're legal contracts and there is some oversight. Where is that?
Well, the only oversight that a legal contract would be subject to would be the oversight of the courts. So if a legal contract is challenged by one party or the other, it could end up in court. But other than that, there is no oversight provided of a business contract. Representative Harrington.
Yeah, as far as the part of what happens if the generator goes down, either because of a planned outage or a inadvertent outage due to equipment failures. I mean, this would be just clearly spelled out in the contract. It could be a situation where, in order to get a better rate, the person buying the electricity makes a deal and says, okay, if you go down with, if your capacity factor remains at 90% or better, we'll pay this rate. But if it drops below 80%, we're going to pay a lower rate as an incentive to get them to do that. Now, obviously, since no one generator is going to run unless they had multiple sources that were independent, it's not going to be 100% of the time. So then the entity consuming the power would probably go onto the grid. And in that case, they would have to have a separate transmission system or distribution system bringing the power into them, and they'd be subject on the purchase of that power to the regulations of the PUC and the utility, and one of which would more than likely be a demand charge, because if 90% of the time you're consuming no electricity and then 10% of the time you want to flip a switch and get, I don't know, 2 megawatts per hour, the electric company is going to want you to pay for that privilege, and rightly should be, because that's something they're going to have to plan on. So those are two separate things that shouldn't be put together. This is a contract, just like someone hires a contract for building a house or whatever. The regulations that apply would be environmental regulations, as stated here, that would apply to everybody. But there's nothing specific to the contract between the generator and the consumer as to how they're going to buy the electricity, what they're going to pay for it. That's just like every other contract. It's decided between the two individuals signing it.
Representative Wendy Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the prime sponsor of this bill, do you envision, we've had a lot of bills about nuclear power. Do you envision nuclear power falling under this agreement?
Well, it certainly could. The idea for this bill came from, as I mentioned in my testimony on the bill, from Texas. And in Texas, there is a movement to create some big AI data centers. And at least one or two of those locations are envisioned to be powered by a nuclear power plant. I think a company called Kairos has contracted with Amazon to build 2 35 megawatt nuclear small molten salt reactor nuclear power plants to power some AI data centers down in Texas. Could that happen here? Maybe. And maybe it would be an economic boon to New Hampshire if it did. Representative Harrington.
Yeah, just to be sure, so there's no confusion here, this bill have nothing to do with the regulation of any nuclear power plant. That would remain regulated by the NRC. It's not unregulated. They would still have to be subject to, let's say, DES in New Hampshire and the EPA if they had a water discharge permit or an air discharge permit. If they were digging holes in the ground, they'd be subject to DES regulations on that. They're not exempt from any of this. They're just exempt from the regulations that apply only to a public utility that's in a generator that's using transmission lines. They're not going to be deregulated. The NRC will definitely be there. DES will definitely be there, and all the required permits will have to be had and maintained.
That is correct. This bill only exempts these off-grid electricity providers from state regulation. not federal regulation.
And not all state regulation, though. It's just the regulation pertaining to a generator and the utility and transmission, because they're still going to be under the guise of, like, for example, DES. They're going to need water permits, air discharge permits from EPA, ground disturbance permits from DES as well if they're digging holes.
As is specified in the bill on line 16. Representative Corman.
Thank you. I counted how many chapters are in Title 34, and there are 38 chapters. And it just seems like that's exempting from a lot of law. I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. I'm also just concerned about safety in general. When Mr. Licata testified, he talked about the concern about wires crossing roadways. And I asked about that, and he said, well, you know, what you do on private property is your concern. So if it doesn't cross a roadway, they're not concerned. But, you know, my concern is, you know, maybe a fire is generated at one of these facilities, and fires have a way of not caring about property lines and roads. So I'm just generally concerned about safety here. Somebody just operating a power plant unregulated, and God knows what happens.
Further comment? Representative McGee.
Yeah, my comment was similar in that I've just, my mind is, you know, that this bill is the what could go wrong bill, because we're not envisioning, we're not specifying how these extra regulatory generation facilities would need to have some boundaries around them for public safety. So the details of what goes into the contract between the generator and the person who's, you know, hiring them to provide their energy for most of the time, that part I'm not as concerned about, except that I don't think that everyone that's entering into that contract might know all the things that they would need to put in, because we kind of assume that when someone's providing electricity to us that there are regulatory imperatives about safety and phasing the electricity onto the system, and, you know, that the wires are appropriate, that everything is being done in a way that is standardized and is safe, to your point. And none of that applies here, right? So somebody can put together whatever they think is probably the easiest way for them to get to the contract, and not necessarily take some of the safety aspects into consideration that regulations require of other people that are providing electricity. That would be my concern.
So I can imagine that if I'm going to buy electricity from one of these generators, that in the contract, I'm going to make sure that I cover my own business's safety issues in the contract. I'm not going to just ignore safety for my business. That would be economic suicide. So the contract is likely to be the document that deals with a lot of these issues that all of you have legitimately raised, and I appreciate that. But nevertheless, the key to this legislation is that it is enabling legislation. It doesn't attempt to solve all the problems that might accrue from the development of these facilities. And it leaves the solving of those problems to innovators to come up with unique solutions that maybe none of us have even thought about or envisioned. So that's what the purpose here is. Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I happen to be looking at RSA Title 34, and what I notice is although there's a lot of chapters here, predominantly it's about how the state collects money. And so I don't know if this is being viewed or argued, because by eliminating Title 34, that they're just, some folks believe that the state's losing a revenue foundation from it. So it authorizes non-capital reserve funds. It requires payments into the fund. It requires investment policies for trust funds. It defines the trustees of the funds. It requires payments from surplus. So what I'm thinking is, I don't know if the argument for eliminating Title 34 is whether it's a safety or safety regulation, or is it more about the collections of money from folks so they can gain more revenue?
Okay, further comment. Representative Bloget.
Thank you, Chair. Just so I understand this better, we got two facilities. One's generating power, going to be built on a piece of property and probably nearby. Another facility is going to use that power to make something. We got two empty lots of land. To put the generator, and the user has to go through all the requirements of the state. Safety, as you said, environmental and everything. Now it's built and all. So this bill, I'm getting to the question, only, in my view, I don't want to use the word regulates, allows the generator to transmit that energy to the next property by contract of how, when, and what have it. All the safety should be taken care of. Now, what am I missing in that analogy?
To my mind, you didn't miss anything. That's exactly what this does. Yeah. All right, let's move on because we have one more bill to discuss. Representative Harrington.
I'll be quick. Just the other thing we really haven't mentioned either is you're still dealing with local building codes and building inspectors. If you're putting up a building to put a generator in, it's going to have to get a building permit. And there are going to be inspections involved in that. And if the transmission line, or whatever you want to call it, distribution line, goes across a third party's property, then they're going to say, if you want to build that line across my property, you're going to have to get a building permit and make sure it meets all the requirements for running electrical lines across my property. And you're going to pay me for the privilege, by the way. And the same thing when it gets to the person who's getting the electricity in, hooking that up, again, is going to be required under the, to get a building code, and it's going to be inspected by the local people as well. So it's not, it doesn't exempt them from all sorts of rules. It just says it doesn't treat them like a public utility.
That is correct. Okay, so there's another amendment that we want to consider, and that's for House Bill 710. I just handed that out. Does everybody have a copy? All right. So you'll recall that in the original bill, House Bill 710, after defining what an advanced nuclear resource is, that bill set up a series of changes to RSA 374-G to allow utilities to invest in or even own an advanced nuclear resource, similar to the way that a utility today can invest in or own a distributed generation resource. And many of you had issues with the idea that a utility could invest in or own a nuclear power plant because they're pretty expensive. So this amendment completely removes that provision from the bill. That is no longer part of HB 710. Instead, what the bill does is it makes it possible for utilities to sign purchase power agreements with advanced nuclear resources, and it uses the language of RSA 374:11, which was added to law 2 years ago by Senate Bill 54. Those of you who were here at the time will remember that Senate Bill 54 was designed to allow utilities to purchase up to 20% of their load in a PPA from a new utility resource. And it was technology neutral. It didn't care what kind of resource it was. It just had to be a newly developed resource. So what I've done here is I've modified that language to allow for nuclear resources to be for utilities to enter into PPAs with nuclear resources. The way Senate Bill 54 was originally written, basically there was a drop dead date of 2026 for proposals for these new PPAs to be signed. So what I've done here is for advanced nuclear resources, I've made an exception that allows them to be developed, proposals can be developed for these PPAs up until 2035. So it extends by 10 years, basically, the provisions of Senate Bill 54 with regard to advanced nuclear resources. So that's the major change here. The other minor change is on lines 5 through 9. I expanded the definition of advanced nuclear resource just to include many of the technologies that are used to create these reactors. And I also changed the original bill stated that they had a generation capacity of between 1 and 90 megawatts. I've now changed that to 0 and 300 megawatts, which is more in line with the industry definition for advanced nuclear resources. So those are the changes that I've made to House Bill 17. I think this is a much cleaner way to go about allowing utilities, if they're interested, to acquire some of their load from nuclear resources. And I'd be interested to hear your reactions. Representative McGee.
Thank you. I thought I saw other people first, so thank you. My question is about the language that starts on line 12 on page 1. It says investor-owned electric distribution utilities may elect to develop and no later than June 30th of 2025 issue a request for proposals for multi-year agreements for energy in conjunction with or independent of any attendant environmental attributes from electric energy sources. And then the bolded language is what includes advanced nuclear resources up to 10 years hence, so June 30th of 2035. But I don't understand why the first line limits any other investor-owned investments or PPA agreements that have to be done before June of this year. So
You'll have to
Yeah,
go back
it-
and look at the debate over Senate Bill 54. That's language directly that was added to statute directly as a result of Senate Bill 54.
well, I guess I would just acknowledge it here in this working meeting as maybe not great language because it is saying that anything that isn't nuclear they can't enter into it, right? It sounds like a prohibition after that date. Is that right? I'm just
it was a
reading it.
prohibition before I wrote this amendment, and it's still a prohibition. I didn't change it.
Right. And I think, I don't know if we have ever asked the utilities about that, but I'm wondering if we're writing an amendment now that extends a window, because obviously there would be quite a bit of time needed in order to get advanced nuclear up and running, for a PPA on one form of energy, why would we, in the same paragraph, be limiting their ability to entertain PPAs, long-term PPAs on any other type of energy? I mean, I think we should consider changing that language or eliminating that language because it does seem unusually restrictive.
I'll be honest with you, I don't remember during the debate over Senate Bill 54 why we restricted it. Maybe Commissioner Elms from the Department of Energy might remember. No pressure, though.
For the record, Deputy Commissioner Chris Helms from the Department of Energy, and I'm going to admit I was sending a text while we were discussing there, so I have no idea what we're talking about, but I'm happy to answer questions. So Senate Bill 54 language was what I gleaned, but
Yeah, so Senate Bill 54 said that investor-owned electric distribution utilities can develop and no later than June 30th of 2025 issue a request for proposals. Why June 30th, 2025?
sure. So Senate Bill 54 was a pretty major change in the state's view on energy procurement, and specifically authorized these the potential for power purchase agreements. If we remember back to the time, which I think was 2 years ago, we had experienced the price shock that was due in large part to the invasion in Ukraine. And I think there was a desire from the legislature, from the governor, from stakeholders to do something to perhaps work on looking at some, essentially financial hedges to what we were seeing there. And so the idea of a power purchase agreement, became attractive to folks. It was something that the department at the time had significant concerns related to ratepayer impact. So as we were talking about what that bill would look like, and the bill did recognize that New Hampshire, New England has a building things problem to an extent. But because this was sort of a novel idea that we're looking at, the idea was that this is in response to a problem that's happening now. We want to keep this limited. We don't want this to be an authority that we're just throwing the door open to, that we wanted to keep it limited, see what came out of it. As you might, I don't know if it's reflected in the amendment. I'm sorry, I haven't seen it. There's also some other restrictions, such as a 2 million megawatt hour cap on what was allowed, which represents about, I think it's 18% of New Hampshire's load. And, the idea was, let's see what comes of this. We haven't seen anything come of it thus far. So sorry, if that was off the cuff. Hopefully it was helpful.
So does that, Representative McGee, does that help you understand why there's a restriction here?
Yeah, I understand the history on it. I'm just wondering whether it seems, because it basically says no later than, does that mean that we intended to take away the ability for them to enter into those power purchase agreements if they make sense? I mean, wouldn't they still have to go in front of the PUC and everything?
And obviously it's the legislative prerogative, but if I remember correctly, there was a up until whatever the date is, June 30th, 2025, the utilities could put out the RFP, and then they had a year to bring that forward to the commission. So I think there was another date of whatever, 2026. I'm not commenting on that, other than to say at the time it was intended to be a limited authority.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that clarification for us. I'd also like to point out that this amendment does not change the 2 million megawatt hour or 20% load restriction that's already in statute as a result of Senate Bill 54. So those limits would still apply even to the advanced nuclear resources that are allowed under this legislation. Representative Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like this a whole lot better than the original bill. Much, much better. I thank you for being open to changing it. There is a typo on line 10 where it says RSA 374G11. That should be 374F11. There is no 374G11. And this text is 374F11.
What line is that?
Line 10.
Line 10? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Did you find another typo?
It's a question of whether it's a typo or not. So the first date is June 30th, 2025 to request an RFP, and then an agreement can be made in June 30, 2026, so 1 year later. But then there's no agreement with the June 30th, 2035. Shouldn't in line 24, shouldn't that be June 30th, 2036 to give it a year to look at the RFP?
Good question.
There you go.
I'm going to circle that and put a question mark there. So how would you feel about adopting this amendment and this legislation and then doing a floor amendment to fix the typos? Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Still, I'd be good with it, I think. But I had another substantive question, really. Line 21, a new clause, the department shall be authorized to issue requests for proposals. I assume that's our Department of Energy. And I'm just furrowing my brow at that, because it seems like is that a new role for the State Department of Energy to be issuing an RFP on behalf of the state's utilities? Could you elaborate?
Yes, when I had a discussion with the department about this amendment, they requested that I add that language, and I don't really remember exactly why. So maybe we could get clarification on that.
If I could, is that something that's happened before in New Hampshire? Seems like a big new thing.
We'll find out in just a second. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm joined by David Shulock, our general counsel. And I would say, when we discussed with Representative Vos, we did discuss that it might be something you want to do. It really is up to the legislature whether or not you want to include it. The reason the department was not included as sort of the issuer of the RFPs in Senate Bill 54 was due in large part to sort of the time-sensitive nature, as I alluded to before, that folks wanted to move something forward quickly, and that at the time the department did not necessarily have the expertise or necessarily the time to go through whatever contracting process we would have to do to get the expertise on board in the time frame that I think folks were imagining. It wasn't because the department might not be an appropriate entity to put out an RFP, especially on something like this where we really have a state public policy goal that the legislature would be putting into effect. I think given the longer time frame that was contemplated here, I think out to 2035, that is something that if we were to participate to put out an RFP, we would be able to get the necessary expertise on board. So it's whether or not you want the department to do it. There are arguments in favor and maybe against, but we are comfortable with that authority.
So this language would authorize the department to issue RFPs, but would not require the department to issue RFPs, correct?
I'll let David weigh in. I'm sorry, I still haven't seen the amendment.
I think that's correct, but you might want to add in the statute that we are issuing the RFP on behalf of the utilities.
Okay.
May I have a
Yes,
follow-up?
Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you articulate some of the potential benefits of having the state act in this way on behalf of the state's utilities as opposed to having the utilities do it for themselves, one or more?
Absolutely. It's a good question, I think, and it's one I want to just be careful. I'm not in no way disparaging the utilities. I think, they would do it fabulously. I think you could make an argument that the department as a neutral sort of party here would not necessarily have any conflict towards a particular resource, or we would be able to recognize that this was a policy direction from the legislature. You could say that perhaps a utility might say the juice isn't worth the squeeze for them. If they're not necessarily going to benefit from it, why would they go through the process of putting out an RFP? The department might be more inclined to do that, recognizing the direction from the legislature. I don't know if David has anything to add to that.
I think that summarizes it.
Okay. Representative Harrington has a question.
First, I want to thank Representative Reynolds for pointing this part out. I had missed it, and I'm just trying to read this over. To me, this is a major, major change in policy. where smells like Massachusetts in the room all of a sudden. The department is authorized to issue requests for proposals. Oh, I don't even know what that means. So the department's going to go out and say, we want you to supply us 500 megawatts or 200 megawatts of something, and then we're going to turn around to the utilities and say, you must buy this? I mean, if you don't have the authority to enforce the contract on the utility, then who's going to submit something to you? Because it'd be no different than if I went out and said, you must supply utility money. I think this is a huge policy change and should not be addressed in an amendment like this. And I really don't want the department going out and issuing requests for proposals, because the only reason that would mean anything is if they're going to turn around to the utility and say, now we've got a proposal, you're buying it. And that sets up a huge conflict then, because that could go to the PUC, and the PUC could turn around and say, we're not approving the contract because it's not in the best interest of the ratepayers, it's too expensive, whatever. So this is a real rabbit hole we're crawling down on this one sentence there. So I can't go along with this.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I just give some thoughts on that?
Yes,
please. From our perspective, it is up to the legislature whether or not you want to do this. Senate Bill 54 was an expansion of power purchase agreement authority. That was something the legislature undertook. So if the legislature wants to continue that, that's within your purview. We will do what we are directed to do by the legislature. I'll let David talk a little bit about what might be necessary if you wanted to pursue this for us to make sure that those contracts are enforced.
So under this paradigm, all of those contracts would go to the Public Utilities Commission for review. That's part of that original statute. So the department would only be issuing the RFP to move things along, right? It might be useful to have some additional language in statute about utility responsibility to purchase. I can't make that language up here as we're speaking, right? But that might be useful. But there is nothing at this point, and this language would get us a little closer to it for ANR, for the department to do things like issue requests for information rather than requests for proposals. So what would it take? Who is interested in building ANR in New Hampshire for us to purchase, right? So that we could start looking at what that market looks like for New Hampshire, and find out if there are companies interested in coming here to do things like that. I don't think that's required in the language for us to do it, but this would get us a step closer to it.
So to that point, should the language say the department shall be authorized to issue requests for information or proposals?
You could. I don't think it's necessary, but you could.
Okay. Representative Harrington?
I still have a major concern, because what it doesn't address is the utility. It says the department shall be authorized to issue requests for proposals. Now, so they get the proposal, and are they then authorized to go to the utilities and say, you will accept this proposal and you will sign a PPA, and then you'll submit that, whatever that contract is, to the PUC? Or can the utilities just simply say, we would have signed that if we thought it was a good idea. We don't need you to tell us how to go out and negotiate contracts for electric supply, because we've been doing that for the last 15 years or whatever, and we have a lot of experts at that. We're not going to do it. So I don't know where this leaves us. It's like taking a half a step and then stopping.
So I think you have it exposed a hole in that paradigm if we're going to be doing the RFP, and it would be useful to have additional language along those lines. When I said on behalf of the utilities, that got us part of the way there. And if I'm looking at, we're probably not going to do that for renewable since the date is passed, but for ANR, we would still have 10 years to work on that process. So.
Representative Kaplan?
Yeah, I don't really want to address the debate over whether the department should be the one issuing the RFPs or not. I think that's an interesting discussion. We already, I will just add that we already have state mandated procurement of energy in one form or another. But what I do want to address is the date issue about the original language of Senate Bill, whatever it was, 54. I think that we ought to be expanding this new program to all forms of energy, because right now it's ANR, and that's trendy, and we like it, but 10 years from now it could be something else. So why are we just limiting it to ANR? We should be opening it up again by removing that original language about June 30th, 2025. I think that's silly.
Would the department object to opening this up to everything?
We would probably have concerns with a full expansion of power purchase agreements. We would have to talk about it. There was a bill that was introduced in the Senate, and that looks like it's coming over, Senate Bill, I think 112, that talked about power purchase agreements. We did have concerns related to ratepayer impacts and administrative impacts. I'm not prepared to talk to give you a full position on expanding the date. The date was an important guardrail that we had worked on a couple of years ago, and to this time still want to maintain that.
All right, let's reserve that discussion for Senate Bill 112 when it gets here. All right, let's Representative Corman.
So it's too bad the Patriots are not playing this week, because I find myself agreeing with Representative Harrington for all the reasons he stated. And also, I just feel like I think the utilities are very capable of putting out their own RFPs.
All right, Representative Ploget.
Thank you, Chair. Since we're rewriting it on line 5, page 1, you said you took this from another source. I didn't write down where, but on line 6, I noticed the dash for describing sodium cooled is missing. That might or might not be a typo if you want to keep the quote.
Sorry, what are you referring to specifically?
Hyphen.
If you want to go down that road, I have a lot.
Oh, sodium cooled, you think should be hyphenated? Is that what you're saying?
All the other ones are, and you said you took that from another. I'm just wondering if the quote is exact.
Okay.
Lead cooled, sodium cooled,
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
water cooled.
Well, looks like I'm going to walk over and ask for an amendment anyway, an amendment change. So I can do that. All right, let's move on because it's getting late. I think we're going to have to defer, since there is no amendment, a discussion of HB 535 until the executive session. So we've discussed all the amendments that we're going to have in the executive session. So why don't we break now for lunch and return here at 1:15 to begin the executive session. So I thank you all, and we'll see you at 1:15. Okay, it being 1:17, we are going to resume our activity for the day. And we are going to have executive sessions on 5 different bills. HB 221, relative to assessment of cost effectiveness of the system benefits charge. HB 672, to allow off-grid electricity providers in New Hampshire. HB 710, enabling electric utilities to own, operate, and offer advanced nuclear resources. HB 535 FN, relative to defining the role of the Public Utilities Commission. HB 599, establishing a committee to examine weatherization initiatives for homes in New Hampshire. And HR 15, urging New Hampshire's congressional representatives to advocate for a change in the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's policies.
And that's 6 bills, not 5.
And you are correct. I was just noticing that as I was reading through this, I realized that HB
Mr. Chair?
599 wasn't on my original.
Mr. Chair, a correction. It's 5 bills and 1 resolution.
Yes, 5 bills and 1 resolution. Technically, that is correct. Yeah. So anyway, that's what we're doing, and so we're going to start. So I'm going to open an executive session on House Bill 221, relative to assessment of cost effectiveness of the system benefits charge, and I recognize Representative Harrington for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to pass the bill as originally presented. Ought to pass the unamended version.
Chair recognizes Representative Summers.
I second that motion.
Moved and seconded that we adopt the motion of ought to pass on House Bill 221. Representative Harrington, do you want to defend your motion?
Well, I just think we've had plenty of discussion on this morning. I still think it gives the ability for the PUC to go back after a period of time to look at if there would need to be any changes to the way the system benefits are measured. And it only does so with a complete adjudicative process, and they have to have that open so all parties would be present and be able.
Yesterday was Monday.
Yes.
I need them by 7 o'clock tomorrow morning because I have to have them turned in by noon tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So we have closed the executive session on HB 221. So now I'm going to open an exec session on House Bill 672 FN to allow for off-grid electricity providers in New Hampshire. And I am going to move ought to pass with amendment 2025-0627H. And I recognize Representative Thomas.
I second.
Moved and seconded that we adopt a motion of ought to pass as amended by 0627H. We had an extensive discussion about this bill this morning. We went over the changes that the amendment makes to the bill, and I think everyone has a thorough understanding of the bill at this point in time. So I would look for your support for passing this amendment and this bill. Further discussion? Representative Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel a little awkward here because I actually co-sponsored the bill, but I'm going to be voting against it because from what I learned in testimony and what I've come to realize in my own thoughts and discussion is that I'm concerned here about safety. I'm concerned about someone really just unregulated running their own power plant and just all the mayhem that may ensue. So just as I've learned about it and thought about it, I've decided to vote against it, even though I was a co-sponsor.
Further discussion? Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After looking at it and discussing the bill here, especially with the amendment, where it makes them exempt from RSA Title 34. And then looking to find that RSA 34 is just basically how the state and the bureaucracy grabs revenue from the electrical companies. Therefore, with the reason why they'd want RSA 34 in place is so they can get their hands on the money for it. I am voting for this bill.
Further discussion? Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, thank you, Mr. Chair. It was stated that this bill leaves the solving of problems to innovators. My concern about that is that it also opens up a situation of the Wild Wild West in New Hampshire. So I will also be voting against this bill.
Further discussion? See, Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that there are, this bill opens up too many opportunities for unintended consequences and is not thoroughly vetted as far as what they might be. So I'm against this.
Further discussion? Representative Partial.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is that we are putting our thumb on small nuclear reactors, which could be a very viable solution, but I think that we need to let the market play out on this. So I'm going to I'm going to vote myself, though.
Further discussion? All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll first on the adoption of the amendment 0627H.
Vice Chair Thomas,
Yes.
Representative Nodder,
Yes.
Representative Harrington,
Yes.
Representative Bernardi, yes. Representative Ploget,
Yes.
Representative Summers,
Yes.
Representative Matson,
Yes.
Representative Schneller,
Yes.
Representative McGee,
No.
Representative Partial,
No.
Representative Kaplan,
Yes.
Representative Thomas,
Wendy Thomas, no.
Representative Corman,
No.
Representative Reynolds,
Yes.
Representative La Rochelle,
Yes.
Representative Swanson,
No.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 to 5.
By a vote of 12 to 5, the amendment is adopted. Now I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended.
I need a second to write that down.
That's what I said.
So who made the motion?
Yeah, do we need,
Vice Chair?
yeah, who's done these motions?
I can second.
I'm sorry.
Representative Nodder, I forgot to get a second.
I second the motion,
asked me.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Nodder seconds the motion of ought to pass as amended.
And you made the primary, right?
And now the clerk can call the roll on the question of ought to pass as amended.
Vice Chair Thomas,
Yes.
Representative Nodder,
Yes.
Representative Harrington,
Yes.
Representative Bernardi, yes. Representative Ploget,
Yes.
Representative Summers,
Yes.
Representative Matson,
Yes.
Representative Schneller,
Yes.
Representative McGee,
No.
Representative Partial,
No.
Representative Kaplan,
Yes.
Representative Thomas,
Wendy Thomas, no.
Representative Corman,
No.
Representative Reynolds,
Yes.
Representative La Rochelle,
Yes.
Representative Swanson,
No.
12 to, oh, Chairman Bose,
Yes.
12 to 5.
By a vote of 12 to 5, the committee adopts the motion of ought to pass as amended on House Bill 672. I will write the majority report. Will there be a minority report?
Yes. Wendy Thomas.
And Wendy Thomas will write the minority report
By 7 a.m.
by 7 a.m., correct. Okay, we'll close the executive session now. on House Bill 672. We are still waiting for an amendment on House Bill 710. Just to fill everybody in, as I check my email to see if it's here yet. Doesn't appear to be here yet. Just to let everybody know, I corrected those 3 typos and eliminated the sentence that allows the Department of Energy to submit requests for proposals. That seemed to be a fairly significant policy change that wasn't made clear to me when I made produced the original amendment. So the new amendment deletes that sentence altogether. And we'll have that at some point. I don't know exactly when. So next, let's take up HR 15. So HR 15, I'll open an exec session on that, and I'll call on Representative Harrington for a motion on the bill and an amendment.
Oops, I don't have the amendment number in front of me, so, okay. Let me just grab the right one. Okay, I move to amend the bill with Amendment 0679, which basically replaces the first part of the bill, and then I move ought to pass on the amendment.
So you move ought to pass on HR 15 as amended by 2025-0679H, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Chair recognizes Representative Mattson.
I second it.
Moved and seconded that we adopt HR 15 as amended by Amendment 0679H. Representative Harrington.
Well, I don't think we need too much more discussion on this. It basically says that, in a nutshell, the utility projects that are done for distribution systems in New Hampshire are scrutinized by the PUC, and the utility has the obligation of proving their costs just and reasonable in order to collect them. On the other hand, on the federal level, if a transmission project, which could be 10, 20, 50 times more expensive, FERC has a policy of presumption of prudency, which they say whatever costs are submitted by the transmission company are assumed to be just and reasonable unless someone else proves otherwise. This would ask our congressional members down in, obviously in Washington, to do whatever they could to change this FERC policy.
Okay, thank you. I think the language on lines 3 through 5 that spells out that current FERC policy is to accept new and upgraded transmission costs via a presumption of prudence without a detailed review of individual project cost is a good addition to this amendment. I think that spells out exactly why we are concerned about this issue. So thank you, Representative McGee, for putting that together. Any further discussion? Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to come as a shock to everyone, I think, but I agree with this resolution with the exception of the final line with the state librarian. I just think it's redundant, but it's not enough for me to vote against it.
Further discussion? Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like it.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of the adoption of the amendment 0679H.
Vice Chair Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Nodder.
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi, yes. Representative Ploget.
Yes.
Representative Summers.
Yes.
Representative Mattson.
Yes.
Representative Schneller.
Yes.
Representative McGee.
Yes.
Representative Partial.
Yes.
Representative Kaplan.
Yes.
Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, yes.
Representative Corman.
Yes.
Representative Reynolds.
Yes.
Representative La Rochelle. Yes. Representative Swanson.
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
17-0.
By a vote of 17-0, the committee adopts the amendment.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Representative Harrington.
I would not like this put on the consent calendar because I would like to bring it up on the floor of the House so that everyone's aware of it. Oh, we haven't got that far yet? Okay, I thought we,
Okay, we're not there yet, but I hear you. So now we need a motion from Representative Harrington to adopt the motion of ought to pass as amended.
I move ought to pass as amended.
Chair recognizes Representative Nodder.
I second the motion.
Moved and seconded that we adopt the motion of ought to pass as amended on HR 15. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk, as soon as he's ready, to call the roll on the question.
Vice Chair Thomas,
Yes?
Representative Nodder,
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi, yes. Representative Ploget,
Yes.
Representative Summers,
Yes.
Representative Matson,
Yes.
Representative Schneller,
Yes.
Representative McGee,
Yes.
Representative Partial,
Yes.
Representative Kaplan,
Yes.
Representative Thomas,
Wendy Thomas, yes.
Representative Corman.
Yes.
Representative Reynolds,
Yes.
Representative La Rochelle,
Yes.
Representative Swanson.
Yes.
Did I miss? Anyone? Kaplan? Okay, all right. Representative Swanson,
Yes.
Chairman Bose,
Yes.
17-0.
By a vote of 17-0, the committee adopts HR 15. Representative Harrington will write the committee report, but the bill will not go on the consent calendar so that Representative Harrington, if he can persuade the speaker and the clerk, can speak on the bill on the floor. So with that, we'll close the executive session on House Resolution 15. Representative Partial.
Yes, I'm sorry to interrupt the flow here, but how do you keep a bill? I mean, this is informative to me. I've never seen a bill pass that should be on consent that is purposely not going to be on consent. Would it help if we had 10 people to pull it off consent?
No, it doesn't.
We-
It doesn't go on consent.
Okay, you can just say, please don't put on consent, and that's good enough?
Yep.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
our decision whether to put it on consent or not the clerk's decision. It's our decision. So if we say no consent, then it doesn't go on consent.
Okay, that's
Check
good
the
to know. I
box.
never knew that. Thank you.
Yes, Representative Nodder.
So another example of something not going on consent would be like a bill to name a bridge in a town after someone that the whole committee votes for, and it's not on consent because they want to talk about it.
I've seen that before. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
You're welcome.
Right, you'll recall that on occasion, there's someone in the gallery that's affected by a bill, and so even though it might be unanimous that the House adopts the bill, you still want to talk about it so you can recognize the folks in the gallery. All right, so moving along, we still don't have the amendment for House Bill 710 yet, at last check. So we will now move to House Bill 535, relative to defining the role of the Public Utilities Commission. And I will recognize Representative Bernardi.
I move ITL.
Chair recognizes Representative Schneller.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adopt the motion of ITL on House Bill 535. Chair recognizes Representative Bernardi.
So the predominant reason for ITLing this is because it requires any agreement that is reached between the parties cannot be reviewed or would not be reviewed by the PUC. So it essentially takes the PUC out of the function of that is their job to review these things, and that's not appropriate.
Further comment, Representative Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The testimony we heard yesterday from the PUC said that they can only base on the evidence that they're presented at hearings. That's why they wanted to make sure that the DOE was at hearings. And given that, it seems that if all the evidence they're getting from the parties agrees about a settlement, they're not going to get any other evidence, so they're going to end up concluding that anyway. So I don't see why there's a problem with this. If all the parties agree and all the evidence presented to the PUC says we're in agreement on this, what would the PUC have to go on that was presented to the contrary other than what the bill says would be, which is if something is contrary to law?
Well, to answer your question, it could allow one of the regulated utilities to bypass PUC review. If they just agree to a settlement, then whatever they have proposed or whatever is proposed in the settlement agreement, according to this bill, would have to be adopted by the PUC. So it would allow the utilities to bypass PUC review in that case. And they could cleverly manipulate the settlement process to create settlements that favor them without having any review by the PUC. So I think this is a very dangerous piece of legislation to pass in its current form. Nobody wanted this piece of legislation. Nobody testified in favor of it except the consumer advocate. And I just think this is a dangerous piece of legislation. There's no confusion or uncertainty about the respective roles of the PUC and DOE in this regard. And so I agree with Representative Bernardi that this is a dangerous bill and we shouldn't go forward with it. Representative Corbin.
Thank you. Well, for one thing, we heard nothing but discord yesterday between DOE and PUC. So I don't think they're on the same page about who has what power. And with regard to the utilities being able to do things unchecked, I would point out that in page 2, section 5, starting on line 23, it says, in any contested case before the commission to which the Department of Energy and the Office of the Consumer Advocate are parties. So it's not just the utilities that would be presenting something, the DOE and the Consumer Advocate would have to agree. And, you know, the Consumer Advocate is not really noted for just going along with the utilities. So I don't see a problem here about the utilities running amok or anything like that. I think that, you know, we have the right checks here to make sure that we have the right parties in the agreement.
Further discussion, Representative Bernardi.
I just think the right checks are in the adjudicative process that occurs in front of the PUC. So if parties have largely agreed on an approach, they can present that approach, but the PUC gets to ask questions about the data that's presented to them to tease out if there's any underlying issues. And if they just have to accept an agreement as written, that opportunity is foreclosed.
Further discussion, Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I'm rereading the bill because I think it's really important to see what it actually says rather than just what we all think it says. And it does seem to be a good faith effort to try and define areas where there has been some difficulty or some question as to who plays which role. So it makes an effort to parse those roles. But to Representative Bernardi's point, Part 2, line 5, page 2 says, the authority of the commission shall consist of conducting contested adjudicative proceedings within the meaning of RSA 541-A31 on matters concerning the rates, charges, tariffs, and services provided by the public utilities as defined in RSA 362:2 and others as specifically authorized under this title and to adopt administrative rules consistent with its authority as provided in this title. They are authorized to conduct adjudicative proceedings, which means asking questions, requiring evidence, calling the utilities and other stakeholders on the carpet to answer the questions that they have. So this doesn't limit or eliminate any of the authority of the PUC. It merely tries to clarify the places where there seems to be difficulty in the process that has been observed by the people who are over there watching how things are operating at this point. And the other bolded sections, I mean, this is a wholesale rewriting, right? This is I don't know, is this a new section? The whole thing? I'm looking to see where it starts here. Yeah, I don't see what it's replacing actually.
It's just adding a paragraph to 363.1.
A section, yeah. So the other bolded section on page 3, line 2, it shall further be the duty of the Department of Energy to petition the Commission for appropriate relief through RSA 365:41 to 44, RSA 374:41, or other appropriate action when the department reasonably believes that a public utility is failing to discharge its obligation pursuant to this title. I thought the explanation in reference to this bill yesterday was that when there is an adjudicative proceeding where the parties have all come to agreement in front of the Public Utilities Commission, that they should make a good faith effort to let that go through unless they have some specific reason, because it is costly for everyone to continue to convene in front of a body that isn't coming to a conclusion on something where everyone else that's involved is already at a settlement, because they usually are on opposing sides.
Representative Bernardi.
So the key word that you read, I think it was the third or fourth word in your initial reading, was congested. The issue here is if there's an agreement that's been signed and everybody signs off on it, it isn't contested. And therefore, all those proceedings are not on the table.
What would be wrong with an uncontested proceeding? Still ask questions.
No, it doesn't say that. You read the word contested. If it is contested, then you can do all those things. The point of this bill was it opens up the opportunity for, behind the PUC's purview, agreeing on an approach, and there's no contest. Therefore, just rubber stamp it and move on.
Okay, further discussion. Representative Harrington.
Yeah, but my major problem with this is, first of all, I'm not even quite sure if it's legal. What you're having here is a group of parties presenting something to the adjudicative body, saying that, excuse me, that we all agree this is the way this issue should be resolved. And you're saying the adjudicative body has no ability to do anything other than to say, well, that's a legal solution, so therefore we must approve it. It would be sort of like, to put an analogy, in the courts where the district attorney and the defense attorney reach some kind of an agreement on a plea bargain, and they go to the judge, and the judge says, you want to let this person out and he's murdered 2 people with only 5 years? No, I'm not approving the plea bargain. If we put this into effect, the judge would have absolutely no authority to do it. He'd have to say, well, whatever you guys agree to, it's not illegal, so you can let the guy get out with 1 day in jail if you want to, but I have no authority to overturn it. You don't take that authority away from the PUC. And I can tell you, as a former PUC commissioner, if someone brought me a deal like that and said, here it is, we've all agreed with it, I would want to review the deal. I'd want to ask questions about the deal. And if I didn't think it was the right thing to do, I wouldn't sign it. regardless of the law. You could kick me off the commission, but I'm not signing a deal that I think is wrong, and I don't think it's right to impose that on any PUC commissioner. They should have the ability to adjudicate something in front of them. Obviously, take a strong recommendation if all parties are involved, but all parties involved don't have the authority and the responsibility of the PUC to set policy.
Further comment, Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I don't agree with the interpretation that this language would be tying the hands of the PUC so strictly as Representative Harrington just described. Rather, what I feel is that in light of the testimony we heard yesterday, that passing this bill would be sending an important message. Well, it would be making an important law, which would be carrying an important message and making a statement that the legislature wants the PUC to abide by the division of responsibilities that were put in place several years ago between an administrative body and the policy-making body of the Department of Energy. We've heard and we've seen that the PUC is continually straying out of its lane and attempting to insert itself, reinsert itself into the policy-making decisions by, refusing to approve settlements. I mean, the consumer advocate said the rate-making process is broken. That's pretty strong stuff. So I think that this is an essential statement by the legislature.
It was a strong statement by the OCA, but it wasn't necessarily a correct statement. Further discussion. Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that there is evidence of existing friction with the DOE and the PUC, and I do believe that this does make a step toward improving clarification or definition of the processes and roles and responsibilities, and does not open the door for abuse. Thank you.
Why take that chance? Further discussion. Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, looking to the bill and on a number of different lines, I noticed that under various sections of 365, the section on inspections, on authority to inspect, under the, I guess, the extent of power to amend, there were a number of places. I read the original 80 pages that constituted the Department of Energy when we didn't have a Department of Energy for several years. And it struck me at the time, because I had done organizational development in my career, that there was a real lack of clarity about who was doing what. And that it could cause problems in the future. And I actually mentioned it, I remember at the time, to the consumer advocate who was, going along and saying, this is going to be great. And I'm like, yeah, but I think this is really blurry. This bill attempts to actually clarify what the DOE should be responding to and answering. So it actually goes, to the place of trying to say, this is how it actually works in operation between the two, now that we have two functioning departments to look at in terms of how they're operating. So it goes to the lengths of trying to eliminate the Public Utilities Commission in places where it says Department of Energy and Public Utilities Commission. So it confuses the fact of who's doing what. And that is perhaps why the Public Utilities Commission is concerned that it needs to do some of the things that it doesn't need to do anymore, because we now have a Department of Energy, which we didn't have for several years before then. So I think it's actually a good clarification, and I don't see any danger here in the PUC not being able to perform all of the things that they do currently as an adjudicator of these cases. I do take the point that if it's an uncontested case, the concern is, well, if everybody here agrees, what if I don't agree? And I think that the Public Utilities Commission is not a party to the agreement, right? They are the adjudicator to see, is it a reasonable thing? So they still get to get all of what they need answered. But if they're coming to a different conclusion than everyone who's party, I would question how that occurs. What are they receiving for information that isn't part of the adjudication?
Well, you have to remember the PUC has about 6 or 7 lawyers on their staff, and they constantly pour through and comb through the RSAs to make sure that every decision they make conforms with state law. Representative Corman.
Thank you. So far, all the objections I've heard, I think, are to Section 5 of the bill. Are there objections to parts of the bill other than Section 5?
I personally object to the entire bill because nobody asked for it except the OCA. There's no, demonstrated reason why we need this bill. That's my main issue with this bill, especially given the fact that it ties the PUC's hands with regards to settlement agreements. I just don't think that's a good idea, and I don't think we should move forward with the bill.
It seems to me that what we heard yesterday morning was good evidence that we need this bill. There's this turf war between DOE and the PUC, and this bill tries to clarify the divisions between the PUC and the DOE. And the reason I asked about any objections other than Section 5, I mean, I would consider an amendment that removes that section and the supporting text and the findings, just if for no other reason than to clarify the difference between DOE and PUC.
It seems to me that statute already defines the difference between the two. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of ITL for House Bill 535.
Vice Chair Thomas,
Yes.
Representative Nodder,
Yes.
Representative Harrington,
Yes.
Representative Bernardi, yes. Representative Ploget,
Yes.
Representative Summers,
Yes.
Representative Matson,
Yes.
Representative Schneller,
Yes.
Representative McGee,
No.
Representative Partial,
Oh,
Representative Kaplan,
no.
Representative Thomas,
Wendy Thomas, no.
Representative Corman,
No.
Representative Reynolds,
No.
Representative La Rochelle,
No.
Representative Swanson,
No.
Chairman Bose,
Yes.
9-8.
So by a vote of 9-8, the committee adopts the motion of ITL on House Bill 535. Representative Bernardi will write the majority report. Will there be a minority report?
Yes, that'll be Representative Corman.
Representative Corman will write the minority report by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. All right, so we're done with House Bill 535. And I am still tracking down the amendment on House Bill 710. So while we continue to wait for this this amendment to show up, we'll open an executive session on House Bill 599, establishing a committee to examine weatherization initiatives for homes in New Hampshire. And I will make a motion of ITL for this bill and recognize Representative Vice Chair Thomas.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we ITL this bill. The reason I make this motion is because weatherization is a well-understood topic. We have, in the 11 years I've been in the legislature, we've seen probably 6 or 7 bills similar to this one, and they never go anywhere because the Department of Energy has good command of the weatherization programs that exist in the state, as do the utilities with New Hampshire Saves. And I don't see anything to be gained by doing another study committee report on a topic that's already well understood. So for that reason, I think we should just ITL this bill. Further comments? Representative Harrington.
Yeah, a couple of quick things. I mean, one thing is sort of like what I consider almost a silly line in the bill about someone's supposed to be able to assess the status of every house in New Hampshire as far as how well it's insulated. I mean, I don't know who's going to do that or how that's going to be done. Certainly, anyone on this commission better spend 24/7 working on it, because it'll take them that long for months in order to come up with that. But secondly, this isn't necessary. I mean, just think about it. Every month you get your electric bill, you open it up, and what do you get in there? New Hampshire Saves. Go here. Here's the website. You want a free energy audit? Here's where you go. We've got a good program. It's working. We don't need another study committee to conclude that we've got a good program and it's working.
Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, I will be opposing the ITL motion. I agree that New Hampshire Saves is an excellent program, but we really do not have an understanding of the housing stock overall in the state, and we really need to assess the need for weatherization on an overall basis and not wait for people to approach New Hampshire Saves on an individual level to try to get what help they deserve. We have a housing crisis in this state, and especially an affordability crisis, and that's been acknowledged by all parties, including our governor. And it's a bottleneck on our state's economic development. We can't attract young working families because we don't have enough houses, and the houses that we do have are unaffordable. Part of the reason they're unaffordable is because they're not weatherized. And we don't have an overall picture of the housing stock and the need for such programs in our state. So I think it's strategic, it's forward thinking, and it's an economic necessity for us to have that information so that we can craft programs and improve the reach of weatherization. Yes, it's well understood. The benefits are very well understood, but what we don't understand is the need for such programs in our state. So that's why this commission would be a good step forward.
Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, thank you. I agree with everything Representative Kaplan just said. The best way that we can help our constituents save energy money is through adequate insulation. And one of the things I asked the prime sponsor about was, would this include education? And that is the key thing, because it's not just the people that get Oh, I beg your pardon. It is not the people that get the bills. It's everyone, and they need to understand the importance of weatherization and how it can help them be in a healthier home and save money.
Okay. Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Current Chairman. You can't get away from me. I know you were hoping I wouldn't put my hand up, but so when we were having the hearing on this bill, I mentioned to Representative Howard that there is a group that used to participate in the Energy Efficiency and Sustainable Energy Board called GDS. One of their principals, Matt Siska, had reached out to me on this bill, HB 599, and he said, "Are you aware that we have a monthly meeting that includes all the stakeholders around weatherization, including contractors, small business owners, agencies, and the utilities?" And he said that the topics that they are covering, including what kind of workforce do we have to do weatherization work in New Hampshire, the very things that this bill contemplates. He said, we could be a resource to these folks if you constitute a committee on this. And so I don't think I, said a lot about it in the hearing or, made a very good case for it. But basically, their interest was, we would love it if the legislature would actually take a look at the housing stock in New Hampshire. We have a lot that we could offer in terms of making them understand better where we're at in terms of penetration for making the housing stock more energy efficiency. And again, that lowers that creates negawatts. That's what energy efficiency does. A negawatt is the energy you no longer use, and the more of that we can build up, the better a system that we have in terms of independence.
Representative Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this argument about establishing a committee is another argument for a government oversight of a industry that is functioning. And to me, this is antithetical to the entire concept of free enterprise. If there is a need, and then there may be a need for insulation, weatherization, whatever, that need is known by those who experience it, and they will use their resources, if they have them, in advancing dealing with that need. We don't need a government program to define people's needs.
Further discussion. Representative Partial.
At first, I was in agreement that we don't need another committee. But upon hearing some of the, especially in particular, what Representative McGee has to say about resources that are available in the community, I think if we want to improve our housing stock, which we're in desperate need of improving, maybe a fresh set of eyes may be in order in a case like this. I will be voting for the bill.
Further discussion. Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I do agree with some of the sentiments expressed against the bill, I think that what is asked for by this bill, what would happen under this bill, is a really small effort. With, as near as I can tell, the cost of 4 people getting mileage reimbursement to meet a few times. I think that the government could play an important, convening role here, and information gathering role more than anything. Yes, about the existing resources, existing programs at our DOE and our New Hampshire Saves, but the New Hampshire Financing Authority has other things. It just could be a valuable convening of minds toward assessing, the current effectiveness of weatherization efforts, and identifying maybe some gaps and some ways that things might be improved use of those existing resources. So I think it's a small ask, and I would ask my colleagues, all of us, to just, I don't think there's a lot of harm in supporting it, and some good things could come out of it. Thanks.
Okay, Vice Chair Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Weatherization, as some of my previous colleagues have stated, is a well-known phenomenon. It's been studied over and over again. I see no need to spend money and time to study it again. Information is out there. This would be no more effective in study than if we want to do a study of why people shouldn't smoke in restaurants. I mean, we all know what's out there, and the education issue. Again, it's on your electric bill. People know about it, and if you're not getting an electric bill, you're not paying for your power. And so, this is just, to me, a good intention by a person that was well intended, but we've done it, and so therefore I will be supporting the ITL motion.
Okay, so seeing no further comments, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of the motion of ITL for House Bill 599.
Vice Chair Thomas,
Yes.
Representative Nodder,
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi, yes. Representative Ploget,
Yes.
Representative Summers,
Yes.
Representative Mattson,
Yes.
Representative Schneller,
Yes.
Representative McGee,
No.
Representative Partial,
No.
Representative Kaplan,
Nope.
Representative Thomas,
Wendy Thomas, no.
Representative Corman,
No.
Representative Reynolds,
No.
Representative La Rochelle,
No.
Representative Swanson,
No.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
9-8.
By a vote of 9-8, the committee adopts the motion of ITL on House Bill 599. I will write the majority report. Will there be a minority report?
Yes, Representative Wendy Thomas.
Representative Wendy Thomas will write the minority report. and have it to me by 7 a.m. tomorrow. Okay, with that, we'll close the exec session on House Bill 599. And now we're down to the last bill, which is House Bill 710, exec session. I move the adoption of House Bill 710 with amendment 2025-0716H. And I recognize Vice Chair Thomas.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adopt House Bill 710 as amended by Amendment 0716H. So there are 4 changes that this amendment introduced. 3 of them are corrections or typos. In line 6, sodium cooled is now sodium dash cooled. That's a biggie. And in line 17, actually now I'm not sure where it's line 10, right? The RSA 374G was changed to F. That was just a typo. And then on line 21, the date June 30th of 2035 was changed to 2036. And then the 4th change is the line that was in the amendment that we were looking at this morning that allowed the Department of Energy to authorize RFPs. That line has been removed entirely, since that was a significant policy change that was probably outside the purview of this piece of legislation. So I removed that, and other than that, this amendment is identical to the one we just discussed this morning. So I hope you'll support this amendment. I think this is a good way to signal to the rest of the country that New Hampshire is open for business when it comes to advanced nuclear resources, and that while there's no guarantee that utilities will acquire any power from advanced nuclear resources based on this bill, at least there's an opportunity to do so. So this is an enabling piece of legislation. And it uses an existing piece of legislation which is well understood, hasn't been used, so we heard this morning from the DOE, but it could be used. And so I think it's a good opportunity for us as a state to signal that the source of future electricity is probably going to be nuclear in this country, the major source. And I think New Hampshire needs to be at the forefront of states getting ready to adopt nuclear energy. So I hope you'll support this amendment and this bill, and I'll entertain comments. Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I appreciate your changes to the bill, and I think it's a good bill. I agree with what you said. I think a good way for us to describe what we're doing here is we're essentially authorizing our New Hampshire distribution utilities to be the anchor tenant, if you will, for a advanced nuclear reactor to be built here in the state. And I think it's very forward-looking. So,
Vice Chair Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, along with this bill and the few others that we passed through this committee, all involving the message that New Hampshire is open to nuclear technology, I think this. I think along with this bill, I think people will see that New Hampshire is finally changing and wants to look at the prospects of possible nuclear energy in the state, particularly small scale. So I applaud this amendment. I think this bill should be passed, and I think this kind of puts the crowning achievement on the several bills that we've heard this year that all address the very same issue. So I intend, of course, to support it.
Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to kind of like steal a line from Representative Swanson, I love it.
Representative Harrington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sure many of you already know this because you probably read nuclear news and nuclear news daily like I do. But the battle is on across the country for different states. So Texas is going all in 100% on attracting nuclear. Ohio's done something. There's 6 or 7 other states that have either reversed their policy saying that they didn't want any nuclear plants built and are now actively encouraging them to be built. So, I mean, I'm not sure this is going to put us in first place, but if we don't have something like this, we'll be totally out of the running. So I think we need a bill like this.
Representative Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to repeat 2 things I've said earlier, something I said 2-3 weeks ago, which is my late wife would be shocked that I'm voting for nuclear, but I am voting for nuclear here. And something I said this morning, which is thanking you, Mr. Chairman, for being open to suggestions as to how to make this bill better.
You're welcome, Representative Kaplan.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to be the cloud on the nuclear parade here. I'm going to be voting against this bill because I believe that the existing legislation should have been amended along with the amendments that you wisely did offer, Mr. Chair, and that is that the date of the sunset date on the original power purchase agreement amendments should really be extended because yes, right now we're looking at nuclear and nuclear is something that we're going to welcome into our state. But 10 years from now, it could be geothermal, it could be offshore wind, it could be a lot of different things. And I think, we shouldn't be limiting it to just nuclear.
Sounds like an opportunity for a bill next year. Representative Partial.
Thank you. You don't think that Representative Corman will be alone. I will be voting against this bill as well. And a new concern of mine, and this was really just considering this, by allowing our utilities to become involved with this, which is a monopoly that this legislature has oversight over, and the state has oversight, we're really setting ourselves up to work against the free market and have a government intrusion into the free market. It does put the finger on the scale, and I am still very hesitant about that.
Representative McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually am in favor of the bill. I don't think it solves all of the things that we maybe want to address in terms of the language around, sunsetting the original concept on distributed utilities entering into PPAs with other forms of energy. But what it does do is it removes that ratepayer risk that we were concerned about when the language included owning and operating. Because if we insist that our utilities buy or operate, then that puts the risk all on the ratepayer, and those are extremely expensive. But this bill, I think, allows them to enter into a power purchase agreement with someone, which might incentivize them to come and build that small scale plant here. And so I think it sends the right signals, but and I don't think we're all agreed, on this, but I think it sends the right signals without being overly heavy-handed, because all it's doing is allowing them to enter into those agreements. It's not insisting that it happens. So I actually appreciate the changes that have been made to bring it to this point, and I think it's an example of us working as a committee.
Representative Bernardi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am not a marketer by trade. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry doing drug development for 40 years. But the one thing the marketers did teach me is if you're going to start a business, the first thing you need is not a product, but customers. And we have assured customers.
Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having lived in Nevada for a few years and dealt with the fights over what to do or how to dispose of nuclear waste, I do have some reservations about this. On the other hand, I believe that we will have the technologies and the ability to deal with that when this becomes mature. So I am in favor of this.
Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, thank you, Mr. Chair. During the testimony for this bill, we heard that there was a great risk for cost overruns, and that there was a very high risk of stranded costs, which would leave our ratepayers on the hook to pay potentially for these projects. Just wanted to remind people of that one.
This is a amendment completely eliminates all that. Representative Schneller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To address something that
Representative Schneller has the floor, please.
to address something Representative Harrington mentioned, that there are other states we are not without competition. I would say that if no competition, no market, and there is clearly a market for small modular reactors to power data centers and an entire nuclear industry and tech industry surrounding that. So this legislation, in conjunction with some of the other bills that this committee has passed, to Vice Chairman Thomas's comments, I think really puts together a fairly healthy portfolio to send a message to the market that we are indeed in business for both nuclear power and as a means to power incremental technology businesses. So I will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
To your point, and to Representative Bernardi's point, the faster the market grows, the more quickly companies will evolve to satisfy that market need. Any further discussion needed? Seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll on the amendment. We didn't do that yet, right?
No.
Yeah. Call the roll on the amendment 0716H.
Vice Chair Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Nodder.
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi. Yes. Representative Ploget.
Yes.
Representative Summers.
Yes.
Representative Mattson.
Yes.
Representative Schneller.
Yes.
Representative McGee.
Yes.
Representative Partial. Representative Kaplan.
No on the amendment.
Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, no.
Representative Corman.
Yes.
Representative Reynolds.
Yes.
Representative La Rochelle.
Yes.
Representative Swanson.
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
15-2.
By a vote of 15-2, Amendment 0716H is adopted. So I will now move ought to pass as amended and recognize Representative Vice Chair Thomas.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adopt the motion of ought to pass as amended by 0716H, House Bill 710. Any further discussion needed? Seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll on the question of the motion of ought to pass as amended.
Vice Chair Thomas.
Yes.
Representative Nodder.
Yes.
Representative Harrington.
Yes.
Representative Bernardi. Yes. Representative Ploget.
Yes.
Representative Summers.
Yes.
Representative Mattson.
Yes.
Representative Schneller.
Yes.
Representative McGee.
Yes.
Representative Partial.
No.
Representative Kaplan.
No.
Representative Thomas.
Wendy Thomas, no.
Representative Corman.
Yes.
Representative Reynolds.
Yes.
Representative La Rochelle.
Yes.
Representative Swanson.
Yes.
Chairman Bose.
Yes.
14-3.
By a vote of 14-3, the committee adopts the motion of ought to pass on House Bill 710. I will write the majority report. Will there be a minority report?
Yes, I'll do the minority report, Mr. Chair. Okay.
Representative Kaplan will write the minority report, and I need that by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. And with that, we'll close the executive session on House Bill 710. And I will thank you all for your hard and significant work here today. We accomplished quite a bit, but we're not done. So next Monday, March 10th, we will have in the morning a full committee work session on 11 bills, I believe the number is, that we still have outstanding. And then in the afternoon, we will have an executive session on those same 11 bills. We have to do this all on one day next week because Tuesday is town meeting day. And the Speaker's office has asked us not to schedule any meetings on Tuesday. And since we only have this room for either Monday or Tuesday, that pretty much seals our fate to having to do all this work on Monday of next week. So come prepared, study the existing bills, and have your comments ready, have any amendments you want to make ready, and we'll go from there. Vice Chair Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a note on next Tuesday. There may be some committees elsewhere that may conduct business. It's not disallowed. So if you are speaking on another bill, perhaps be aware of any committee that might be meeting on Tuesday, just in case they are. We won't be.
So the Speaker is going to allow other committees to meet? No?
It's not disallowed. It's discouraged. It's discouraged, but not disallowed.
Oh, it's discouraged but not disallowed, sort of like geoengineering, I guess. Okay.
Do we have to notify the federal authorities?
ST&E joke.
All right. All right. Anybody else have anything before we call it a day? Okay, we're done. Thank you, everyone. I would ask everybody to clear this room because Republicans need to caucus. So thank you, everybody. See you next week.